Okay, so thank you so much for being here today, David. It's so lovely to meet you.
Great to be here.
Your new book is called Finding Mr. Goldman. What's this about?
It's the story of the unexpected. Unexpected death and unexpected love. It's the story of an evil and wealthy man who dies and finds himself plunged into a nightmare in which his earthly life of violence and ruthless greed is laid bare before him. So, accompanied by a very likeable tramp who bears a similarity to Jesus, he sets out on a quest to try to save his soul. But confronted by the shattering reality of hell, he begins to see that all is lost. And it's when he reaches a point of absolute despair that something quite amazing happens.
Can you tell us why you wrote the book?
I wrote the book because it was unfinished business. I'd done something that I was ashamed of, something which was really wrong. My first book was called Faith in Dark Places, and that book was about how the gospel is good news for the poor, but it's also good news from among the poor. So the focus of that was on poverty. And as I was writing that book, I was thinking how much poverty is caused by the greed of the rich. So partway through that book, I inserted a little story which I thought up, which was how a rich man dies and goes not to heaven but to the gates of heaven, and he can't get in. And he can't get in because he can't let go of his earthly possessions. And that's where I ended the story. And I left the rich man there, stranded for all eternity. And I have to say, I did derive a grim satisfaction from writing that. It was like taking revenge on the rich. And later on, I thought, that's not right. Vengeance is no part of love. And you can't respond to injustice with hatred. And if vengeance has no part of love, then vengeance has no part of God. And so I began to wonder how God responds to absolute evil in the world. Is it by vengeance or is it by something else? And that's why I wrote the Goldman story. And Goldman actually gives us a clue in the story, because at one point he says to the tramp, who's called Shepherd, he says, inside every rich man there is a frightened child. And you begin to have an insight into one of the drivers of greed and violence in the world. And somehow it's a way of understanding how a God of love would react to what happens in the world, which we call evil. And I don't mean evil in a sort of academic, theoretical sense. I mean evil in the sense of stuff that damages the planet through climate change, stuff that damages people, especially people living in poverty. And that's what the Goldman book really explores, but in a dramatic and, well, theoretically fictional way.
Who's your favourite character?
My favourite character in the book ought to be Shepherd the tramp, because Shepherd is really the Jesus figure. And I really like Shepherd because he really cares about Goldman, and he teases him, and Shepherd's got a wonderful, wicked sense of humour, as I suspect Jesus had as well. So I'm all for saying, oh, my favourite character is Shepherd. But actually, the character that I enjoyed writing most is the cowardly window cleaner. Now you may say, what on earth's a cowardly window cleaner doing in a book like this? And I have to say to you, I'm not going to tell you, you'll have to read the book. But it would make a blindingly good Bible study.
So, are you planning more books?
Yes. I say that with hesitation because the book I've got in mind is going to be a bit of a turbulent book. Before I got ordained, I used to be a journalist, and journalists ask questions, and good journalists ask awkward questions. And I've got some awkward questions that I want to ask the church. And I'm not sure the church is going to be very pleased with that. But I think that they're questions that need asking. And in a way, they challenge some of the assumptions that we have in the church. I mean, I think they also actually challenge some of the doctrines of the church. So it's a bit, I think I'm on thin ice. It's pretty scary stuff, and I'm not sure how it's going to work out. I've done quite a bit of preparation for it, and I'm going to give it a go. I don't want to be sort of negative, and I don't want to attack the church, but I do want to sort of gently challenge the church on some things. And these are things that the church is happy about, but a huge number of people outside the church are either confused by or are really not very happy about. And so, I mean, it sounds really patronising to say I'd like to be a critical friend, but I suppose in a way that that is it. It's sort of, because I care about the church, I want to hold it to account, not as an ordained person, but as a journalist, and say, from outside, this is how it looks. Show me where I'm wrong. And I think, at best, it would raise some interesting questions and create some quite creative and useful conversations.
Who is your favourite author?
My favourite author is probably Charles Dickens, partly because he's such a brilliant writer. I mean, his stories are so wonderfully engaging and the characters are so rich, but also because of his absolute passion for justice and his utter outrage at the way that the poor were treated in Victorian Britain. And he had a huge impact on society, really. And so I would almost certainly say Charles Dickens. The almost bit actually comes in because I think there's somebody who is my even better favourite than that. And that would be St. Luke. And that's not a cop-out. I think Luke's Gospel is the most astounding piece of writing. And thinking about what's in it, the parables of the prodigal son, the Good Samaritan, if we didn't have Luke's Gospel, I think our faith and our understanding of God and our understanding of Jesus would be hugely impoverished. You could probably say that about almost anything in the New Testament, but actually I think Luke really nails it about what Jesus was doing and why he was doing it.
So, of the 5 books you've written, which is the best?
My instinct is to say the first one, Faith in Dark Places, partly because it was the first and therefore it was really special, but also because it was about people I'd met on the streets, people living in real poverty. And it was exploring how, as I've said, the gospel is good news for the poor, but it's also good news from among the poor. And really, Faith in Dark Places was about how we love our neighbour, even when our neighbour is someone really different to us. When I came to write Goldman, it dawned on me that the Goldman book is how do we love our enemy, which is equally required of us by Jesus. And it's very easy to demonise the rich. And I've realised that that's not the answer. And there's a bit in Goldman where you realise how vulnerable he is. And the thought occurred to me, we're never going to solve the problem of poverty until we figure out what's actually causing greed. What's the driver for injustice in the world? And I think the Goldman book explores that. And so, in a way, I think that is the best book. But it's not for me to say. It's not which book do I consider is the best. It's which book really best serves God. And that's what I'm interested in, and that's why I write books.
Wow, that was really interesting. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been interesting for me because it's made me think about the books in a way that I've probably not thought about them before, so thank you.